But the first question is, last year, the government poured more than 1 billion into 19 out of the top 20 countries run by the world's most corrupt regimes, such as Syria, Sudan, Somalia, and North Korea. Tory MP Philip Davis has said, "This is a colossal waste of money. Do the panel agree, and what should we do about it?"
Thank you. Well, I'd agree with Suzanne on one point, that we don't want money going to corrupt governments. Of course we don't want that. But in those countries, the countries which have been referred to, you've got some of the poorest people in the world, you've got some of the most disadvantaged children on the planet, and you've got some of the most needy areas. So we do wish to support those areas. There are also, many of them are countries with which we've got historical links. You could argue that we've also got historical responsibilities. So I think we should be giving money to some of the countries listed of which Britain has had involvement in one way or other could be Afghanistan, Zimbabwe, go through a number of the other ones, Iraq, Haiti, and then there's Sudan, which is South Sudan, which is one of the most desperate countries on the planet. And if you're saying we should stop all finance to there, you are really going to make the lives of some people in the world, which are really very, very desperate and very poor at the moment, you're going to make them even worse, and you'll find that children and families will suffer even more, and we won't be able to play any part in trying to control the Ebola crisis. So it would be making a desperate situation worse. What we should be doing instead, and you won't agree with this either, we should be cooperating with the other countries in Europe to make certain that we have a more coordinated plan, a more balanced approach, and we should also be working with the UN and some of the international NGOs in these different countries to make certain that the money is getting to the people to whom it's intended and not going to corrupt governments. I'm not suggesting it's easy, but an easy solution is not to withdraw from that, because that would make the situation much worse.
Peter Morgan. Poverty, you say it's in corrupt countries. Question one, what is the aid being, how is aid being used to address the bad governance in countries? Question two, I don't think it's true that corrupt equals poor. Ghana's quite a poor country, but it's not a corrupt country. Population growth is a major problem with poverty. What are we doing to address population growth? For example, the population of Nigeria went up 6 times in 50 years. If populations are going to grow at that rate, how are we going to address poverty? What are we doing to address population growth? Why is the aid budget increasing when other budgets are cut or held? What's the justification for actually increasing the aid? And none of the panelists have explained how they will get aid spent effectively. Zimbabwe, corrupt country, brutal dictator in charge, ruthless control. How can we help the people in Zimbabwe without helping Mugabe stay in power? Thank you.
I mean, there was quite a lot in that question. Enough in that to keep us going all night, but I'll try and address some of the points that you referred to. There are a number of bodies and organisations in this country and indeed around the world that try and support countries where their democracy needs support. The Westminster Foundation for Democracy is one. There's the Carter Institute in America, which help with elections and go and observe elections. It's not election monitoring, it's observing elections, not interfering, and telling them and suggesting improvements that they could make. And well, Zimbabwe is one of the countries you referred to. Zimbabwe is a country that usually refuses to allow any election observers in, and it is very difficult. Britain obviously has got strong historical links with Zimbabwe, and whether we want to take responsibility for some of that, I don't know. You mentioned population growth. Well, in many countries in the world, the growth of the population has decreased. I mean, our friend, Sasha, I beg your pardon, from Bangladesh, again a country I know well, probably not as well as he does, but that used to have a population of 9 children for every woman, and now it's down to something like that, 2.3, I think. So, yeah, a lot of effort has been made on maternal health, on helping women and young girls with education and access, if they want to family planning issues. And that is the sort of thing where we can help in other countries. It's not population control, it's giving people access to the facilities that most women in this country have to make the decisions for themselves. So there are a number of things that we can do. I can't remember your point on the aid budget. The aid budget is increasing. Why is it protected? Well, I think it's for a whole variety of reasons, many of which came up in the first question. We're talking about some of the most desperate places in the world, and they do need our support. And the pressures on this country, if we didn't put money into those countries to help them develop, could be even worse.
Is Trevor Davis in the audience? Yes. Thank you very much, Trevor. You asked 3 very good questions. And I'll start with the first, if I may. This is your statement. The EU is a racket that looks after its own. A true statement by Nigel Farage, especially in the context of the question, does charity begin at home? There is talk about the UK taxpayers paying towards EU pensions. Would one of the panelists like to make a comment, please?
I'll say a few words. Yeah, but I'll put my cards on the table. I think in a few years' time, having been a member of the European Parliament for 15 years, I will be in receipt of some sort of pension from the European Parliament, in the same way that anybody who works for any company would be. And I spent 15 years as a teacher as well, so I think I'll be in. Like, as anybody, I contributed to a teacher's pension, I contributed to a European Parliament pension, which I'll get in a few years, hopefully a few more years at the time. So yes, but some of the pensions, I agree, some of the packages for high EU officials seem to be enormous, and I'm afraid that is not unique to the European Union. There's a lot of a scandal over the huge pension payoffs to people at the BBC and other companies in this country, and people on enormous amounts which are very difficult to justify. The European Union, as we now have it, was started in the immediate aftermath of the Second World War to prevent war in Europe. And on that count, it's been singularly successful. Well, NATO, you mentioned NATO. NATO is a military union, and military power can bring peace. What it cannot do is keep peace, and you need democratic structures. You need democratic structures to keep peace. The British Army brought some sort of peace in Northern Ireland, but the only lasting peace has become because there's democratic structures and people recognise that. European Union. I'm sorry? In where?
In the knee in Northern Ireland.
I can't hear what it's. I can't hear what.
I think he's saying people are still shooting people in Northern Ireland.
Oh well, the number of people being killed in Northern Ireland is a fraction of what it was before, and I think we should welcome the peace process there. The peace in Western Europe, brought about by the European Union, is immensely successful, and there may not be many people here, and I'm not one, who went through the generation that lived through war, and those people will welcome the fact there's now 28 countries in the European Union working closely together. Yes, there are all sorts of things that have to be done. Tom referred to the budget increase. Well, European Union, 28 countries. We know that there are some of the countries in the European Union that are poorer and need support. And I don't have any qualms about saying it's right that we should support the countries of Central and Eastern Europe, because many of them are emerging democracies that do need our support. And if we don't do that, we can, well, if you see, people, I have, with great respect, then you want to look at the reasons why people come to this country from Poland, from Czech Republic, from other those countries. They will come here because they can earn there's no evidence to suggest that people leave those countries and come here just for the benefits. They come here with the intention of working, and the vast majority of them, a higher proportion of people from Central and Eastern Europe in this country, if you let me finish, instead of just trying to abuse it, if you did listen to the answer, you might find it a little bit more informative. You may not agree with me, but at least might listen. The vast majority of people who uproot their family and themselves and travel hundreds of miles to another country where they perhaps are not as brilliantly averse with the language as they'd like to be, do so because they want to work. If we are serious, if we are serious about supporting those people, and if you have concerns about the number of people who come to this country from other countries in the European Union, then you should be supporting giving more money to those countries to help them so that their economies can recover. Their economies can recover, their countries can be more prosperous, and people can stay there, and they can live in their own communities there. You cannot have it both ways if you have people in this country who still want to go and live in Spain, in France, and you want to travel around the world as well. So you really need to understand the whole complex situation. The EU is only as good as the member states and the people. The EU is the European Parliament, the European Commission, and the Council of Ministers of the governments. It doesn't have a sort of driver of its own. It is only as good as the people who are putting into it. So if you think it's a racket, well then you've got to condemn all of those factions, and you've got to condemn the successive government ministers from this country and from all the other countries. So, you know, we are part of it, so it's not a completely separate body. We're part of it, the UKIP members of the European Parliament, everybody involved in it, and it's up to all of us, if you think it's not functioning properly, to make it better.
Well, let's have a referendum then. Let's have a vote. And that's the problem, isn't it? We can't vote any of those unelected commissioners out. We're stuck with them.
Is Leanne Bruni in the audience? Thank you, Leanne. Leanne's question is, 1 in 4 children in the UK live in poverty. Bearing this in mind, shouldn't our priority be eliminating poverty in the UK as opposed to abroad?
I think you can also make another comparison, if you may. I mean, look at the banner for water aid. Even people who are going to food banks and in the most desperate situation in this country have access to clean water. There are millions of children, possibly even 1 billion children and families in the world who don't have access to clean water. So I'm not going to use the term relative poverty, but I'm sure you see, if you haven't been there, you've seen pictures of countries where people are starving. There are people who are going short of food and hungry in this country, and it's a tragedy and it shouldn't be happening. But in other countries, there are whole swathes of people. We know this, you've seen it on the television, of people who are millions of people starving, children dying of starvation, haven't had a meal for days. This country, we have a social service that supports families and supports people. And yes, sometimes they do slip through the loop, and yes, we've got to do more, and this government is trying to do so. But if you've been to places in the world where you see, I went to Sri Lanka after the tsunami and the situation there, you wouldn't say we shouldn't be doing everything to support them. And people in this country, when there are appeals, are very, very generous. The DEC, the Disaster Emergencies Committee, supports people in appalling situations around the world. So I don't think the two are separate. Yes, we've got to address poverty in this country, but we've also got to have a budget to support some of the most desperate situations all around the world. And I think it would be a dreadful shame if any political party was saying we shouldn't be supporting children and families starving in some of the poorest parts of the world.
To substantiate your figures there, Robert, 1 million children go to bed every night hungry. 900 billion people go to bed without clean water in the following morning. And 2.4 billion people don't have a toilet. So this is what we're comparing ourselves with. Those poor people that don't have water and don't have sanitation. Thank you, Robert.
Oh, okay. It's just one thing that's bothering me about all this poverty and everything, is that a lot of rich people, and especially rich foreign investors, are just buying up all our properties in England and just raking off money from there. And that means that people who live here actually can't afford to buy their own homes and can't afford to live. And that is increasing the poverty of this country. And what good is that doing to ordinary people? Is anything at all being done to stop this happening? Because it's really upsetting. I mean, it started off with people buying places in Cornwall, rich people buying places, and then local people can't afford to buy. I personally think it ought to be illegal for foreigners to buy places here until they've lived here for at least 10 years. And I think that people shouldn't be able to just buy second homes and just rent them out. I don't believe in property for investment, because it's making people homeless. It's just not fair. Stop people who have, okay, I've got £10 million and I'm going to buy that flat as well, and I'm going to buy that flat, and I'm going to buy that flat, and so other people can't get them because the price goes up so much. Are you going to stop that? How? Well,
The question is from Raj Sood, and the question is, when will the government and the Labour Party listen to its 70 million citizens? Can the traditional parties not understand that we're simply fed up with foreign aid policy and the cuts that affect us here? When will you hear us? After the next coalition of UKIP and the Greens?
The question that was just asked actually said the population of this country is 70 million, it's actually 64, but that's neither here nor there. But the question wasn't just about whether people are fed up with traditional political parties, and there's no doubt that the evidence is that the parties that were traditional parties are getting a smaller percentage of the vote. But the question was that they are fed up with it and fed up with the foreign aid policies of those parties. Now, I don't believe that if you were to have a referendum on foreign aid, international development budget in this country, that you would have a majority of people in this country who would want to stop aid going to some of the poorest places of the world, which we've discussed tonight. I really believe that the 70 million people, 64 million, or however many vote, the vast majority of those are decent, sensible people who would understand the rationale for having a budget to help the countries in the world, whether it's with water aid or countries where people are starving. And I think there would be a wide swathe body of support amongst the four of the political parties here, the Labour Party, the Conservative Party, Liberal Democrats, the Green Party, and other parties. I'm afraid it's only UKIP at the moment that is saying they want to cut the international development budget, and I think if there were a referendum on that, I think the vast majority of people in this country would support, not without reforms, but would support the principle of continuing it.